In this tutorial, I'll be demonstrating how to take your existing asset data and bring it into AssetCentral Lite using the CSV import feature. On the screen, you can see that I've already created this location Memphis data center. And at that location, there are two floors. And on the second floor, there's this room called the second floor data center lab. And what I want to do today is take this data I have about the devices in that room and import it into Asset Central so that I don't have to re-enter all this information for each device by hand. If I go to that second floor location right now, see that I have 3 racks there, but there's currently nothing in those racks. So what I'm going to want to do is go to the administration page, and on the administration page, I'm going to want to export a copy of the assets that are currently in the Asset Central database. And I'm doing that because I want to get the column names so that I can match those column names to the Excel file where I have the assets currently. So I've downloaded this CSV file using the CSV export feature. And so if I open that up now, you'll see that it currently just has one record, and I'm not actually interested in the record here. What I really want is this information up top of the column headings. So in fact, these first 4 columns here, up to asset deleted, these aren't even interesting to me because I'm going to be importing new assets, and this is just information that would be used if I was looking at stuff that already existed. So I'm going to delete those 4 columns, and now what I'm going to do is look and try to find those matches between the Asset Central data format and the spreadsheet that I've been using to track assets. So here you can see that around column G, here we are, we have the same field heading, which is asset name, and that's great. So this is going to be the display name for the asset. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to rename this column heading to match this this column heading here. Now for the device model, what we actually are looking for is an asset type, as we call them in Asset Central. And here you can see that this first column in the file we exported from Asset Central is called Asset Type ID. And that's actually what we're going to want to use for this column device model. So I'm creating a column here called Asset Type ID. And in that column, we're actually going to put an ID number from the Asset Central database. What I'm going to need to do in order to get that number is in Asset Central, I'm going to go to AssetTypes, and here we go. And looking at each of these device models, I'm going to need to select, or rather add the ID number for that asset type. So this first one that says APC AP 7841, that's a rack PDU. I can see that the ID for that in Asset Central is 2. So these first 2 are both 2. This next one, Avicen Cyclades, I'm not really sure if that's how you'd say that. ACS 8 is right here, and these are both going to be 3. So then we can just go down the rest of the list. These are both 5 here. This is the HP DL360 G7 is number 1. So we have 1, And for this one, the ProLine 350p, we don't have an asset type for this in our asset type library right this second. So what I'm going to have to do is, before I import this, I need to create this asset type. So I'm going to go to add new asset or rather add new asset type. So I'm adding a new asset type for the HP ProLine ML 350p G8 and so on. This is a pretty long model name, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to cut and paste the name into this first field here. And we also like to mention that it's a server in this display name. This is, when you look at an asset in a rack, this first field name is where it'll is what is going to be displayed there. If we, for the make, we're going to just use HP. For the model, I'm going to just use all this information in here. And the type is server. I can leave this checkbox unchecked because this is not a virtual asset. And I'm not going to enter anything for the parent slot type ID. I created image files for this device in advance. So if I go to HP, it should be under ProLine ML. And here we go, ProLine ML. And I can see that here the last letter is F for front. So I'm selecting that for the image file name. And this first one is for the front image. And the second is for the back image. So I'm going to, once again, go down to the ProLine ML 350. And here's the back image. I know from looking at HP's specifications that this is a 5UI device, and when I come down here, I'm not going to enter any of this information down here right now, but as for the nameplate power, it takes a 750 watt power supply, so I'm just going to enter 750 for now. This other information you can enter, but we'll cover that in a different tutorial. So I'm going to save this, and now you can see that I have an asset type for this device that is in my Excel file. So now I can come back to this Excel file and enter 9 for the asset type ID on this one. And for the IBM 750, I'm just finishing this up here, 777, and then this is, Panduit is 8 and 8. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to need to have is the rack ID. So I have this rack name here, but what I really need, if I look at my file, is the rack ID. And so I'm going to insert another column here and write rack ID. And once again, I'm going to use AssetCentral to find the correct ID numbers for this. So I'm going to return to the administration page and go to racks in the manage item table. And here you can see that I have a list of a lot of racks. I'm going to look back at my file here, and you can see that the rack name here corresponds to the rack name I've already created in AssetCentral. So for this first one, I can see that the ID is actually 2. And then this one is rack DC Lab 02, and that's here. So that's actually 3. And so I can just do that all the way down. So and if you were dealing with a lot of data in this situation, you could also use VLOOKUP or some of the other advanced features of Excel to match data between two sources. But this is a pretty small data set, so I'm just kind of doing this by hand here. So this all looks okay to me for now. And so the next column I see in my file here is rack position RU. And so this is a very important field. And sometimes, if you've been tracking things in Excel, you might not have this. But what this is supposed to be is the vertical position in the rack of the device. So, for example, this Dell server here is at rack height 35 in the rack, so it's about three quarters of the way up the rack in a 42U rack. And I can see that I don't appear to have that column name in this file. The file in AssetCentral, that is referred to as the row. So if I come back here, all I would actually need to do, and this in AssetCentral, it's also important to point out that the row is the vertical position in the rack of the device, and it starts at the top of the device. So if you've been tracking, I'm going to add another column here for row. And so if you've been tracking, in a lot of cases, people will track from the bottom of the device. Then you'll just need to add the height of the device to that to your measurement and get the top rack unit for the device. In this case, I'm pretty satisfied that these are going to be correct as the topmost measurement for the asset. And so I can just move them right over here. And for the primary contact, we have in AssetCentral, once again, we have contacts here. So once again, I'm just going to do the same thing that I did a minute ago. And I have just two contacts in this file. So I'm just going to add two new contacts. And this one is Steve Smith. And I'm going to leave all this information blank for the time being. And then the other contact I see in here is Joel Nelson. Okay, so I'm going to add another contact, and this is going to say Joel Nelson, and I'm going to save that. Okay, and once again, I have their ID numbers here, and what we're actually going to be using, if you look at this column E, it's contact ID. So I'm going to add another column here that is contact ID, and so we see that Steve Smith is 2, and okay, so we're going to just bring this all down here, and okay. Now the next column in our file is OS, and if I look through this entire list of headings that we brought out of AssetCentral, you'll see that we don't have a column for OS. But that's okay, because with AssetCentral, we can make new dynamic asset fields to cover that situation. So if I go to administration, and then I go to this option here, dynamic asset fields, click on it, and then I'm going to click add new field, and this first one is going to be OS, and the field here we're just going to enter it in lowercase OS, and we're going to make this a drop-down select so that people can select from a number of different options but they but they are limited to the ones that are there, and this will help us keep the data normal. So we have a couple existing ones in our file. We have Windows Server 2008, and the way this gets entered is that I actually enter it twice with a comma separating both entries and then a semicolon. The next one I think in the file is, okay, so we say okay. Then we have CentOS. And then we had AIX was the last one. Okay. And I'm going to save that. So now I have this other field for OS. Now, if I go back to my file here, we'll see that if I scroll to the right, there we go. If I scroll to the right here, the next field is team. And once again, we don't have a team field in AssetCentral to start. So I'm going to add another field. And in this case, instead of using that drop-down option, I'm going to just make it a simple input so that when somebody adds a new asset, they just type in the name of the team rather than selecting from a drop-down. Okay, so now I have my two extra fields, and you'll notice that if I go back to my file, we have this column that says DB field, and we're going to be importing this into our database. So I want these column names to match with caps, in a cap-sensitive way, the database field name here. So now we have in this file in Excel a properly arranged set of data that can be brought into AssetCentral. We have a corresponding asset type ID for each model. We have a corresponding rack ID for each rack. We know the vertical location of the asset in the rack. And we also have the contact ID, and we've created fields for the information that was not being tracked by AssetCentral originally. So we should be just about ready to import. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to save this file. I'm going to save it as a CSV file. So in Excel in Windows, I can change the type of file I'm going to save it to be the CSV, comma delimited. And this seems like an okay title for the file. Okay, that's fine. And you'll usually get a warning about CSV files, and you can just approve that you understand what's going on. But from this file, I'm also going to get rid of some of this extra information that's still here. So in this file, we don't necessarily need to have this old device model field or column, and we don't need this rack one because we have the rack ID here, so I'm going to get rid of that. And same thing with this primary contact and this rack RU position, we've renamed that as row. And so this stuff is really the important information that we're going to be importing. So I'm going to just save this again. And now I'm going to import that data into Asset Central. So here we are with Asset Central, and I'm going to go to Administration, and I'm going to go to CSV Import, and I'm going to go Browse, I'm importing this. So I'm told that 15 records were imported properly, and that's great. So I'm going to go back to Locations and to this DC lab, and I'm going to look at this first rack here. And now, as you can see, we have a bunch of devices that are now installed in this rack. And if I highlight any of these devices, I get more information about that device. And if I click on this one, say that says banana on it, you can see that the contact information, as well as the operating system and the team, were all imported. So that's a quick demonstration of how you can import your existing records into Asset Central.